A cowboy found a letter in his dead brother's pocket and cried when he read it. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from today? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now settle into a quiet place, breathe deep, and let the whispers of the Wild West carry you into tonight's tale. Gunsmoke still hung over the mountain battlefield. Gray evening settled across the rocky ridges, and a cold wind cut through the gaps, carrying the sharp tang of blood and gunpowder. Amid the splattered red earth, a cowboy knelt beside his brother's lifeless body. His calloused hands trembled, and tears traced lines down his rugged face. From the blood-stained pocket of his brother's coat, he pulled out a crumpled letter, the edges frayed as if it had been read 100 times before. His eyes lingered on the words smudged and trembling with emotion. If you still come, I will wait. The children ask about you every day. Jonathan clutched the letter, his chest tightening. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a home still waited, a woman still believed. And from that moment, the path of his life shifted, a journey born from an unfulfilled promise and a love that would unexpectedly save 3 souls. The campfire flickered in the cold mountain night, throwing long dancing shadows across the rugged stone. The wind whistled through the canyon, biting and relentless wrapping around the flames, as if trying to snuff out the fragile warmth that remained. The scent of pine smoke stung the nose, mingling with damp horsehide and the dry, earthy smell of the battlefield. Jonathan sat there alone. His frame was thin, but resilient, cloaked in dust and dried blood. Nearby, his horse stood still, each exhale puffing white clouds into the dark. In Jonathan's hands, the crumpled letter quivered in the breeze, its worn edges seeming to have waited for him for a very long time. His gaze hardened, yet deep within was a shadow of grief, a pain still raw and unhealed. The firelight reflected in his eyes, half sparkling with determination, half drowned in loss. He read again the words etched into his heart. If you still come, I will wait. The children ask about you every day. Jonathan closed his eyes, his hands gripping the paper tight. In the eerie howl of the wind, he whispered as if making a vow. Brother, if you cannot, then I will stand there in your place. In that moment, beneath the cold western sky, a lone cowboy chose to leave the darkness of war behind to seek the glow of an oil lamp still waiting a distant home. A woman and 2 children he had never met yet, carrying the only remaining hope in his life. From here, Jonathan's journey began, a journey from tragedy to redemption, from loss to a love that could become a shelter against every storm the West would bring. Part 1. Bad news on the wind. The sun had slipped low behind the mountains, leaving the sky streaked with fading shades of orange. The dusty red trail stretched endlessly eastward, leading into a dry, barren valley, where the town of Rivermouth nestled along the banks of a narrow river. Jonathan urged his horse forward, moving slowly, his body leaning low over the saddle, as if the weight of endless riding pressed down on his shoulders. His coat was worn and frayed, dust-streaked, and still smelling faintly of gunpowder. The evening wind blew clouds of dust across his path, turning the landscape ahead into a hazy, dreamlike blur. Each hoofbeat echoed harshly in the quiet air, reminding him that he was stepping onto a journey with no turning back. Inside the innermost pocket of his coat, the crumpled letter rested, edges soaked with sweat, and the heavy rhythm of his breathing along the way. Every time the wind swept past, he could almost hear a voice whisper at his ear, a woman's voice, distant yet pleading. "If you still come, I will wait." Jonathan tugged gently on the reins, stopping his horse at the crest of a small rise. From here, he could see the sprawling fields, golden grass bending in the wind. In the distance, tiny wooden houses huddled around a leaning church steeple. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney of the town's single saloon, vanishing into the darkening sky. His heart quickened. With every gust of wind, sand and dust whistled past his ears, like the whispers of the past war, his brother's death, and the unfulfilled promise now driving him forward. He knew that in just a few minutes, once he stepped into Rivermouth, everything would change. As Jonathan rode into town, a few townsfolk tending their porches glanced up. Their eyes were wary, a mix of curiosity and caution. A stranger in dust-streaked clothes, gaunt and weary like a ghost emerging from the night. A man hauling a sack of grain looked up, blinking and wiping sweat from his brow. Jonathan held his horse back and asked in a hoarse, tired voice, "Do you know a woman named Georgia Ryland?" The man blinked, nodded. "Georgia. Yeah, she lives on the edge of town right by the apple orchard path. Old place, but easy to spot two boys usually running around the yard making noise all day." Jonathan gave a slight nod, tipping his hat. "Thank you." The man studied him for a moment longer, then spoke softly, like the wind through the trees. "Be careful. Georgia Ryland suffered enough. If you plan to do anything, don't hurt her more." The warning struck Jonathan like a cold blade to the chest. He tightened his grip on the reins and silently urged his horse forward. The road out of town was narrow and rough, flanked by broken fences and wild grass. Jonathan felt every heavy beat of his heart like a drum inside his chest. The sound of hoofbeats mingled with the wind, dry, lonely, unyielding. He imagined the scene awaiting him, an aging home, a woman with calloused hands, eyes weighed down by long years of waiting. And the children, they would ask, "Is Pa coming home?" He could hear the question slicing through the air like a knife. His chest tightened, his throat went dry. A wave of doubt swept over him, a fleeting fear that he might not be enough to make things right. Darkness fell quickly. The wind from the river carried a chill and the scent of damp earth. Jonathan pulled his scarf, higher eyes fixed on the open clearing ahead, where the thinning forest gave way to a small plot of land. As the new moon rose, he saw it, a weathered homestead, silvered roof, patched wooden walls. A narrow porch held a flickering oil lamp. On the porch, a woman stood still, her shadow stretching under the moonlight. Beside her leaned a rifle against the wall. The horse whinnied softly. Jonathan pulled on the reins, bringing the horse to a halt. His breath puffed white into the night. This was the place the letter had led him, to the place where an unfinished promise awaited fulfillment. He bowed his head, his hand brushing instinctively against the old letter in his pocket. And in the moment the wind rushed past, Jonathan whispered, "Cal, I've come." Part 2. Meeting on the porch. The wind swept across the plains, tossing brittle tufts of grass that had dried under the summer sun and winter frost. The homestead appeared quietly, like an old figure struggling to stand against the storm of time. The faded wooden boards creaked with each gust. The front door shivered weakly on its hinges, rusty and groaning like a long sigh. On the porch, a woman stood still. Georgia Ryland, the name that had haunted Jonathan along the way, from the blurred ink on the letter to the whispered instructions left in his late brother's heart. Her faded brown dress clung to a slender frame, her calloused hands hanging at her sides, trembling slightly as if unable to resist the evening wind. Her thick black hair was neatly braided, draped over one shoulder, a few stray strands brushing against her pale cheekbones. Her eyes fixed on the dusty trail, just as Jonathan guided his horse to a halt. The flickering light of the oil lamp behind her cast a weak yellow halo, highlighting dark circles beneath her eyes and the weariness etched into her mouth. Jonathan drew a deep breath and swung himself down from the saddle. His heavy boots struck the dry earth with a crisp sound. He removed his hat, clutching it in both hands, and walked slowly toward her, each step deliberate, carrying the weight of bad news. Georgia Ryland. His voice was hoarse, low fading with the wind. She nodded slightly, lips trembling. Yes, that's me. And you are. Jonathan stopped at the bottom step, eyes lifting to her pale face. He tightened his grip on his hat and spoke with a gravity that weighed like stone. I'm Jonathan Cole, Cal's younger brother. The air froze. For a moment, the entire house seemed to hold its breath. Georgia's shoulders shook eyes wide, her breath coming in uneven gasps. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and old chimney ash, draping the moment over them like a wet blanket. No, she whispered, voice nearly breaking. He couldn't. Jonathan bowed his head, speaking slow and steady. Cal died 3 days ago. Georgia swayed, clutching the porch post for support. Tears welled at the corners of her eyes, her gaze clouded with shock. She turned her face away, as if looking straight at the man before her would make the truth permanent. Jonathan's hand slipped into the inner pocket of his coat. His rough fingers trembled as they brushed against something familiar. He pulled out 2 crumpled, yellowed pages, holding them with both hands as if offering a treasure. I found these letters in Cal's coat. They're yours. Georgia stared at the wind-tossed pages, eyes wide with fear and longing. She stepped down from the porch, hands hardened from labor, shaking like leaves in a storm. When her fingers touched the paper, a single tear fell soaking into the already smudged edges. She pressed the letters to her chest, shoulders, hunched her entire body, trembling as if about to collapse. Jonathan stood still, hands tightening around his hat heart, contracting in his chest. He wanted to speak, but in moments like this, words felt unnecessary. Then from somewhere behind the house, a shout rang out. Mama, look. 2 small figures burst from the orchard, bare feet, dusty hair wild. A 6-year-old boy face, bright missing a few teeth, ran toward the porch. Behind him, an older boy, about 10, clutched a rough wooden stick like a sword. Is Pa home? The younger cried, eyes sparkling with hope. Jonathan's chest tightened. Georgia collapsed slightly, gathering the boys in her arms, shaking her head in silent sorrow. No children. This isn't Pa. This is Uncle Jonathan, your father's brother. The word Pa hung in the air like a blade. Jonathan bit his lip, meeting the pure eyes of the children, seeing their hope crumble in their mother's arms. The older boy, Zeke, stood, tall gray eyes just like Cal's, staring at Jonathan. In that gaze was suspicion, caution, and a simmering anger born from a child who had learned to protect his family too soon. "You're not Pa?" he said firmly. Jonathan nodded slightly, voice steady. "No, I'm not." At that moment, the younger boy, Zachary, lifted his head, his innocent smile still flickering. "But you look like Pa." Jonathan knelt to meet the children's eyes, voice trembling yet resolute. "Your father tried to come back, but he couldn't. I've come to stand where he could not." The words hung in the air, slicing the past from the future. Night fell as Georgia led the stranger inside. The small room glowed with the warm light of an oil lamp on the old wooden table. The faint smell of burning pine mixed with dry bread, creating a space that was at once warm and sorrowful. Jonathan sat down, hat resting on his chest, quietly watching the children on the wooden floor, listening to the gentle clatter of spoons from the kitchen. Georgia stood by the stove, back-turned shoulders shaking with the weight of emotion. He bowed his head slightly, whispering to himself, "Cal, you left a hole too large to fill, but I'll try to stand where you could not." Part 3. The Fatherless Children. The late afternoon sun danced across the yard, casting pale golden streaks over dry grass and a haze of red dust. A gentle wind blew in from the plains, carrying the warm scent of earth and the lingering aroma of wood smoke from the kitchen, mingling with the faint dampness of Jonathan's coat as he stood on the porch. From the field ahead, 2 boys burst out bare feet, leaving prints in the dust hair tangled and wild in the breeze. Zeke, 10 years old, wore a stern expression, gray eyes as cold as icebrow, furrowed in wary suspicion. His small hands gripped a rough wooden stick, ready to defend himself against a world that was unfamiliar and unknown. Jonathan understood this caution well. The younger boy, 6-year-old Zachary, followed behind, innocent, a missing tooth smile bright on his face, eyes wide with curiosity. His steps were clumsy, yet full of energy, laughter, mixing with the clatter of dust and stone underfoot. Georgia stood between the porch and the yard, holding the 2 boys tightly. She trembled, eyes brimming with tears, lips moving silently. Her heart ached as she watched her sons ready to face anything strange, yet still holding hope, though too cautious to trust fully. Jonathan drew a deep breath, the white mist of his exhale rising in the afternoon sun. He raised a hand in a gentle wave, keeping a safe distance. "Zeke, Zachary, I'm Jonathan, your father's brother." Zeke froze, eyes fixed on Jonathan, body tense, ready to either flee or strike. "You're not Pa," he said firmly, voice shaking slightly, equal parts challenge and defense. Zachary stepped closer, hesitant, swaying, as if testing the waters, eyes filled with hope. "But you look like Pa," he murmured, hands relaxed, but ready to grasp if needed. Georgia let out a shaky breath, drawing her children closer. Her gaze met Jonathan's, pleading yet warning. "Please, don't hurt them. They've lost too much already." Jonathan knelt, eyes level with Zeke, maintaining a safe distance while giving his full attention to the boy. His voice was deep and steady yet soft. "I'm not your Pa, but I've come because of a promise. Cal couldn't return. I've come to stand where he could not." Zeke furrowed his brow, hands still clutching the stick. He stepped back a few paces, testing Jonathan. "If you're just a stranger, then why do you care about us?" Jonathan lowered his gaze to the children, then slowly pulled out the letters. His hand trembled slightly as he held them up, sunlight glinting off the crumpled edges. "These letters, Cal wanted you to know. He would have come back, but he couldn't. I found them, and I thought you had the right to know." Zachary's eyes widened, stepping forward, hands trembling as he reached for the paper. He clutched it tightly, as if afraid it might vanish. Zeke remained rigid gray eyes locked on Jonathan, suspicion lingering, but a small smile flickered like the first light of dawn breaking through fog. A breeze swept past, carrying red dust across Jonathan's face. He closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling the scent of dust smoke and dry earth. Everything mingled warning and invitation all at once. When he opened his eyes, he saw Georgia exhale, tears glinting in her eyes. Yet a faint smile appeared, a first sign of forgiveness, of trust. Jonathan sat down, keeping his distance, giving the boys time to feel him. He simply watched slowly, silently, and thought, if I can be the protector where he could not, then I will. A delicate moment broke through. Zachary suddenly lowered his stick, stepping forward to lightly touch Jonathan's hand, a small, fleeting act of trust. Zeke watched silently, still wary, but did not retreat, his boundaries softening just a little. Jonathan smiled softly, wordless, but his eyes spoke a promise. He knew acceptance would not come overnight. It would take time, action, and patience, just as he had patiently ridden along this dusty road. The wind tugged gently at George's hair, carrying the scents of earth and lingering wood smoke. Jonathan rose slowly and stepped onto the porch, placing the letters into her hands. "I'll stay, not out of duty, but because I want to." He paused, meeting her gaze directly. "Because I want to keep a promise, and because I want to protect your children." Georgia's lips trembled as she gripped the letters, tears falling, blending with dust and sunlight. The boys watched closely, Zachary curious, Zeke serious, but with a glimmer of hope. For a few seconds, everything was still, only the wind whistling through broken fences, distant birds calling, and Jonathan's steady breathing remained a new heartbeat forming for a family waiting to be built. Finally, Zeke lowered his stick brow, still furrowed, but unafraid. Zachary smiled softly, still holding the letter, realizing that someone would be by their side. Georgia exhaled a spark of hope, brightening her eyes after months of solitude. The golden afternoon yard wind, sweeping dust swirling, and three figures standing before one another. A stranger, a resilient mother, and two fatherless boys planted the seeds of gentle love. And thus began a journey of healing, just starting to unfold. Part 4. A quiet dinner. The oil lamp flickered, casting a soft, pale yellow glow over the small, rickety wooden table in the modest homestead. The scent of smoldering wood from the stove filled the room, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread. Jonathan drew in a deep breath, feeling both warmth and a gentle melancholy settle over him. The two boys, Zeke and Zachary, sat across from each other on old, low wooden chairs. Zeke remained serious eyes, darting constantly, hands resting on the edge of the table. Zachary was more carefree, gripping his spoon tightly, glancing at Jonathan and then at his mother, as if seeking approval. Georgia sat in the middle, her hands lightly resting on her son's shoulders, eyes following Jonathan's every movement. She sensed the caution in him, not the passing stranger who would arrive and leave, but a man standing quietly waiting to be accepted. Jonathan set his hat down in the corner, hands rough, and calloused, resting on his thighs. He exhaled slowly. He watched the dinner unfold, saying nothing. Yet his calm, steady gaze conveyed safety to the household. For the first time since the letter had come into his hands, he felt the rhythm of a family's heartbeat slowing, harmonizing with his own. On the table were simple fare, a steaming pot of vegetable soup, freshly baked bread, and some hard cheese. Jonathan scooped spoonfuls of soup, eating slowly and quietly. Georgia observed him, noting the respect and patience in his actions. No words were necessary. Every feeling was conveyed through gaze, gesture, and breath. Zachary leaned forward, trying to smile, reaching out tentatively toward Jonathan's hand, then withdrawing unsure. Zeke continued to watch intently, eyes half shielded, yet a spark of curiosity began to flicker beneath the caution. Jonathan noticed this and gently placed his hand on the edge of the table near Zachary, silently building a bridge between himself and the boy. The wind whispered through a gap in the door, rustling leaves outside, mingling with the soft crackle of the fire. Everything seemed to slow down, leaving only the quiet, filled with the warmth of food, the scent of damp earth from the yard, and the faint smell of Jonathan's sweat-dampened coat. Jonathan took a small sip of water, eyes still on Georgia, watching how she cared for the children. He understood that trust must be built from the smallest gestures. And here, in quiet simplicity, during an unassuming dinner, was the first step. Zeke exhaled softly, finally reaching across to touch Jonathan's soup bowl. A fleeting moment yet, Jonathan recognized the sign. No words were spoken, but the distance had begun to shrink. Zachary smiled, eyes bright, as if realizing that a true protector had arrived in their home. Georgia whispered, You are not who I thought you were." Her voice was gentler now, no longer harsh. Jonathan responded softly, "I know, but I will stay." Not grandiose words, not long, promises yet enough to convey the message he would remain, not out of duty, but because he wanted to. The sound of spoons against bowls echoed in slow rhythm like a soft song through the night. Jonathan looked at Zeke gently. Every word a man speaks to a boy carries meaning. I want you to learn more from silence. Zeke's lips moved as if to respond, yet he held back. Zachary shook his head, but his eyes remained fixed on Jonathan's every movement. Georgia watched, sensing the difference not everyone entered her home with such respect and patience. Dinner passed quietly, but not in distance. It was the beginning of a new rhythm, where every gesture, every glance became a bridge, connecting those who had lost too much. When the meal ended, Jonathan stood wiping his hands on a simple cloth, then looked out the window. The last rays of sunlight lingered over the fields, stretching to the horizon. He knew the journey of healing had only just begun. Georgia cleared the dishes, eyes still following Jonathan. She exhaled softly, feeling for the first time in months a fragile sense of trust settle in her heart. The two boys ran around the table, attempting to touch Jonathan awkwardly, and he smiled, responding gently to each gesture. That moment, silent yet filled with hearts beginning to beat together, was the first connection. Jonathan knew that to keep the promise made for his brother, he would need patience, and he would need to live each day as though they had invited him into their lives. The wind slipped through the doorway, carrying the scents of earth smoke and the faint red dust from the yard. Jonathan turned to look at Georgia, eyes steady and warm. No words were needed. She understood he had chosen to stay. For the first time under the flickering oil lamp with Zachary's quiet laughter, Zeke's wary but curious gaze, and George's tearful yet gentle eyes, Jonathan felt a tentative certain peace, like a new heartbeat awakening across the homestead. Part 5. The Man Who Stands. In early morning dew still clung to the grass, each droplet sparkling like crystal as it fell to the damp earth. Jonathan stood by the broken wooden fence, running his hand over the rough wood, feeling every crack, every rusty nail. In the distance, the field stretched out faded gold under the weak morning sun, silent, vast, and as wide as the west he had just stepped into. Zachary ran up, eyes bright, clutching a small wooden stick, eager but still hesitant. The little boy studied Jonathan, each movement of the man before him, both mysterious and strangely safe. Jonathan smiled faintly and nodded. "Want to try?" Zachary shook his head, but his hands never left the stick. He exhaled, then slowly stepped closer, watching every motion as Jonathan hammered, lifted heavy boards, and lined up the new fence. The rhythmic clatter of the hammer struck like a simple rustic song across the plains. Jonathan focused eyes tracing each crack in the fence, carefully guiding the boards into place. No shouting, no correcting every motion. Deliberate teaching the boy to watch, to learn. Zachary imitated quietly, hands trembling, eyes wide with wonder. A subtle moment, he looked at Jonathan as if seeing a role model, a man who didn't just speak, but acted. His breathing merged with the wind over the plains, and Jonathan realized this was the way to earn the boy's trust, through action, patience, and quiet guidance, not words. Georgia stood back by the horse gate, watching silently. The early sunlight glinted off her neatly braided hair, catching hints of silver. She exhaled gently, no longer suspicious, yet still cautious. Her heart quickened as she saw Jonathan not only repairing the fence, but teaching Zachary to balance, hold the hammer, and place his hands correctly. She understood this man could stand beside them, not only in peaceful moments, but in times of hardship. The soft clop of hooves rang out as Jonathan led the horse from the stall, letting it graze and adjusting the saddle. The horse's breath mingled with the scents of damp earth and straw, creating a lively, grounding presence in the still, untamed homestead. Zachary watched eagerly. "How do you not hurt your hands?" he asked softly. Jonathan smiled, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "You learn slowly. Every hammer strike must be sure, step by step. Life can't be rushed." Zeke stood silently in the corner of the yard, still wary, but his gaze had softened. He observed Jonathan guiding Zachary, understanding that this presence was not intrusion or replacement, but silent support full of respect. The early sunlight poured through the newly built fence, casting warm streaks across Jonathan's face, highlighting red dust and sweat on his brow. He remained calm, speaking little, yet every action conveyed a clear message. He would stay not out of duty, but to protect, to be a support for these lone souls. By midday, the sky had turned pale blue, the wind steady, carrying the scent of smoke from the kitchen and warm earth. Jonathan looked to Zeke and nodded. "Want to try?" Zeke furrowed his brow, clutching his stick, eyes serious, then gave a small nod. Jonathan guided his hands, gently showing each step, every grip of the hammer, the careful placement of nails. Slowly, Steadily, Zeke followed along. Each hammer strike rang out no longer fearful, but with a budding confidence, a small spark breaking through the fog glass of doubt. Georgia stood nearby, hands, clasped eyes glistening. She realized what she had feared for so long, a man who did not come just to speak, but to act, to heal with his own hands. Zachary ran around the yard, picking up fallen nails, eyes bright laughing. His laughter mingled with the hammering, the horse's gentle whinny, the wind through the plains, all forming a tender, healing countryside melody, mending the invisible scars this small family had borne. Jonathan stood quietly, hand resting on a fence post, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat align with the two boys. A silent yet profound connection, a foundation for trust slowly forming. Finally, Zeke smiled faintly, nodding at Jonathan. Zachary grinned, broadly, running over to tug his hand. "Help me finish this?" Jonathan smiled, nodding, and the yard suddenly came alive. Every gesture, every action flowed in quiet harmony full of meaning. He knew that to become the man who stands in it was not enough to simply fill a void. He had to live each moment with them, share each heartbeat, each breath. The afternoon sun streamed through the new fence, casting warm light on Jonathan's face. He bowed his head, looking at the boys, voice deep, yet warm. "I'll stay, not to replace, but to keep a promise, and to show you that someone will always stand beside you." The wind blew through, shaking the boards slightly, carrying the scent of straw earth and Jonathan's dust-covered coat, creating a space full of life warmth and the wild spirit of the West. And in that moment, Georgia realized a man had chosen to stand with them, not to take the place of what was lost, but to help them build a true home where love and kindness formed a shelter against any storm. Part 6, Confessions in the Night, fell quickly over the homestead. The sky, deep black, studded with twinkling stars. In the distance, cottonwood trees swayed gently in the wind. A cold breeze swept across the porch, carrying the scent of damp earth and dry grass. 2 steaming mugs of coffee sat between Jonathan and Georgia, the heat curling upward into the quiet air. Jonathan sat upright, hands wrapped around his mug, savoring every bit of warmth. The wind teased the strands of hair falling across his forehead, but his eyes remained fixed on Georgia. His face was stern lines, etched deep from years of war and loss, yet his gaze shimmered with a longing unlike anything before. Georgia sat across from him, hands gripping her coffee tightly, shoulders tensing with each gust. Her neatly braided hair fell into her face, but she did not push it away. Her eyes were wary, carrying the familiar fear of being abandoned again, of further loss of emptiness with no one to protect her. Silence stretched, punctuated only by the soft gurgle of coffee as Jonathan sipped his breath, mingling with the gentle wind through the porch. He drew a deep breath, exhaling slowly, voice low and hoarse. "Georgia, there's something I want to tell you." She tilted her head slightly, eyes still wary, yet opening as if waiting to hear a truth she might not fully trust. Jonathan set the mug down, hands clenching as though to lend weight to the words he was about to speak. "I didn't come here out of duty. I didn't come to replace Cal. I came because I wanted to." Georgia closed her eyes, exhaling softly. She trembled, whispering, You understand." But why can't I believe I'm afraid? Her words faltered, half spoken, half suppressed, fearing that speaking too much might betray herself. Jonathan leaned slightly forward, warm and steady. I know you're afraid. I know you've lost too much. But if I didn't come, who would stand beside your children? Who would keep the promises Cal could not? The wind gusted, stirring a few dry leaves across the porch, their rustling emphasizing the loneliness of the West. Georgia shivered, gripping the edge of the table, heart tightening as she looked at Jonathan. Part of her wanted to resist, yet another part longed for his presence. Jonathan lifted his hand, brushing hers lightly, creating an invisible bridge between their souls. He whispered, carrying weight in every word, I'll stay. Not out of duty, but for you, for the children, and for this home. I want to live with you, with them in the peace Cal never had the chance to give. Georgia remained silent. Her eyes opened wide, the oil lamplight casting a gentle glow across her worn but tender face. Tears traced down her cheeks, no longer fear, but the first stirrings of hope. She trembled, yet this time it was the shiver of safety, not of fright. Jonathan leaned in slightly, voice low. I don't promise perfection, but I promise I won't leave. I'll be here in every morning, dew over the fields, in every flicker of the campfire at night, to protect you and the children. And if you let me try. She looked into his eyes, seeing steadfastness, sincerity beyond denial. The night surrounded them, wind whispering across the porch, the dry grass rustling, hearts breathing in unison. In that moment, fear seemed to recede. Georgia exhaled a small, fragile smile appearing at the corner of her lips. If you stay, then stay for real. Truly. Jonathan smiled softly, eyes shining with gentle joy. He reached out, taking her hand, firmly, yet lightly, conveying every unspoken promise. Zachary and Zeke, standing quietly in the shadows near the porch, watched intently. They didn't fully understand yet, but instinct told them that Jonathan's presence was unlike anyone they had known. Jonathan was someone who stood beside them, not a man taking a place that had been lost. Steady breaths, the warmth of coffee, the wind on the porch, the gentle darkness all merged into a new rhythm, slow but sure, like a heartbeat, reviving the homestead. Jonathan leaned, slightly whispering, I won't leave. Not ever. Georgia nodded softly, tears falling onto his hand, eyes tender, yet deep, as if all the loneliness and sorrow of the years had finally found a safe harbor. That night's dinner ended in silence, but no distance remained. Every breath, every glance, every heartbeat intertwined, laying the foundation for trust and a love gradually blooming. Jonathan sat long after saying nothing, simply watching the two boys and Georgia feeling every heartbeat, every gesture. He knew the next step required patience, action standing beside them through every morning mist, every gust of wind, every harsh storm of the unforgiving West. At last the night wind settled, carrying the scent of damp earth and prairie dust. Jonathan rose, picking up the remaining cup of coffee, eyes sweeping across the fields where the first days of peace promised to unfold. Georgia stood beside him quietly, not touching, but letting her gaze speak everything. We will trust you if you show us. And in that silence, the wind, the lamp's glow, and the mingling of breaths, a new chapter of this family began, a chapter of hope, of redemption, and of love, slow, steady, and certain. Part 7. Zeke's Trust. The The fields in front of the homestead were dusted with a thin layer of snow, the pale morning light slipping through the clouds left from the night before. The wind swept across the plains, carrying the crisp sounds of winter to Jonathan's ears. The creak of tree branches, the crunch of snow under Zeke's boots, and the steady rhythm of an axe chopping wood. Jonathan stood before a large log hammer in hand, his breath curling in the cold air. He glanced down at Zeke, 10 years old, standing nearby with a furrowed brow, lips pressed tight, body tense. The boy's hands were clenched as he watched Jonathan, a mixture of caution and curiosity in his eyes. "Don't worry," Jonathan said, low and hoarse yet warm. "I'll guide you, one strike at a time, careful, steady. No rushing." Zeke furrowed his brow, but his eyes followed every move Jonathan made. Jonathan placed the hammer in the boy's hands, showing him how to hold it, how to swing, how to lift. His hand brushed Zeke's as he pointed to the log. And in that instant, the boy felt a strange sense of safety, unlike anything he had ever known. Zeke's breath trembled as he gripped the hammer, eyes wary yet focused on every movement. Jonathan stood beside him in silence, letting the boy feel the weight, feel the rhythm, learning to trust little by little. The axe bit into the wood dust flying in the cold air. Zeke tried again, striking the log. The wood creaked sharply, but not as he had hoped. He frowned, frustrated, and stepped back. Jonathan stepped forward gently, hand on Zeke's shoulder. "Every strike teaches a lesson," he said warmly. "Not every hit is perfect, but every hit has meaning." Zeke's frown remained, but his eyes softened. He looked at Jonathan, recognizing the man's patience. No hurry, no judgment, just presence and guidance. Zeke raised the hammer again, hands shaking slightly, and brought it down on the log. The sound rang out, but this time with just the right force. His eyes lit with a small joy, mingled with the fading shadow of doubt. Jonathan smiled faintly, eyes glistening but calm. "Good. Keep going." Nearby, Zachary held a small stick, giggling. "Help, Zeke, please." Zeke glanced at his little brother, frowning at first, but the corner of his mouth curved slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of Jonathan's presence. He struck the log a few more times, steadier, now hands no longer trembling. Jonathan met his gaze, voice soft but firm. "You're doing well? See? Sometimes trust begins with a small action." Zeke straightened, inhaled deeply, and whispered hoarsely, filled with feeling, "Pa." The moment froze. Jonathan's heart leapt, eyes misting. He bent slightly, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, saying nothing. All fell silent, the wind blowing snow, drifting the axe still, and only their hearts beat together. Georgia stood at the stable door, watching quietly. Tears welled in her eyes, but her lips curved into a soft smile. At last, Zeke's wariness, doubt, and fear of being abandoned had met trust worthy of his small heart. Jonathan whispered low and warm, "I won't leave. Not ever." Zachary ran up, throwing his arms around him, laughing. Zeke looked at his brother, eyes softened, recognizing that this man could truly stand with their family, not only in quiet, peaceful hours, but through all the hardships to come. The wind swept across the snowy field, carrying the scent of earthwood and Jonathan's warm breath. That moment felt like a gentle melody, slow but steady, marking the first turning point in this small family's journey toward healing. Jonathan stood hand still on Zeke's shoulder, watching the two boys run across the yard, eyes misted but smiling warmly. He knew this was only the beginning. Trust had to be built day by day, hour by hour, with every gesture. Late afternoon settled over the snowy field, the pale golden light filtering through the window, casting a warm glow on Georgia's neatly braided hair. The scene was quiet, yet full of life, a silent promise that someone would always stand beside them. Jonathan lowered his gaze to the snow-covered field, whispering to himself, "I will keep my promise, and I will never leave." The soft wind stirred the cottonwood branches, carrying the scent of earthwood and Zachary's joyful laughter. The homestead seemed to awaken every heartbeat, every gesture, every glance blending together, forming the foundation for trust and a love ready to grow. Part 8. A Heart opens. The winter wind howled through the cracks in the window, slicing a sharp chill into the small kitchen. The fire flickered in the hearth, dancing casting streaks of orange and red across the worn wooden walls. The scents of smoke, freshly baked bread, and warm coffee mingled on the air, creating a gentle warmth, yet one still tinged with the raw, untamed spirit of the West. Georgia stood by the stove, hands clasped around her faded brown cotton dress, eyes glimmering and trembling with each gust of wind. She lowered her head, drawing in a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. Over the past days, she had watched Jonathan with her children, repairing the fence, guiding the boys, tending the horse. But there remained a barrier in her heart, fear of loss, fear of being abandoned again. Jonathan stepped into the kitchen, the soft creak of his boots against the wooden floor, blending with the smell of smoke. He stood near Georgia, the firelight tracing the lines of his weathered face, highlighting a steady warmth in his eyes. He said nothing, at first only looked at her. No rush, no pressure, letting his presence alone convey certainty and gentleness. Georgia exhaled softly, eyes shining with tears. She knew she had been waiting for something, but fear had kept her from opening her heart completely. Jonathan stepped closer, placing his hand lightly on the table near hers, gaze unwavering and warm. "Georgia," he whispered, voice low but tender, "I know you're afraid, but you don't have to wait alone anymore." She turned slightly, voice trembling. "Jonathan, I don't know." He leaned in a faint smile on his lips, eyes both steady and warm. "You don't have to know right now. Just feel. Just know. I have chosen to stand by you with the children." The soft crackle of the fire, the small sounds in the kitchen created a slow, comforting rhythm. Georgia looked at him, sensing the sincerity in every glance, every movement. A gentle moment of release came over her. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, letting go of the fear she had buried for so long. Jonathan moved a little closer, lightly touching her hand, not forcing, only giving reassurance. "I don't promise perfection," he whispered, steady and calm. "But I promise to stay. Every day, every night, I will stand by you and the children." Georgia trembled, lips barely moving. I don't want to wait any longer. I want to believe. I want to open my heart." Jonathan smiled softly, eyes sparkling with gentle joy and relief. He leaned forward, taking her hand, holding it firmly, yet gently. "Then let us try. Together." Zachary and Zeke stood quietly outside the kitchen, watching with wide, hopeful eyes. They didn't yet understand everything that was unfolding, but they felt the change. The man before them was now part of their family, steady and trustworthy, Georgia nodded slightly, eyes still trembling, but softer, a small smile appearing. She inhaled deeply, releasing the tension and loneliness she had carried for months. Jonathan leaned in slightly, voice low and reassuring. "I'll be here, and I won't leave. Not ever." She exhaled, eyes following his hands, feeling every heartbeat in sync with her own. A gentle, slow-growing trust began to bloom in her heart. The fire flickered in the hearth smoke and coffee scents, mingling the kitchen warm, yet still holding the untamed essence of the West. For a few quiet beats, only the two of them stood there, opening their hearts without words, conveying trust through glances, gestures, and shared breaths. Jonathan slowly took her hand, pressing a gentle kiss to the back of it, silent yet full of weight and promise. Georgia shivered, eyes closed, a soft smile breaking across her lips. She realized that her loneliness and loss no longer stood alone. A firm hand was here, and it would not leave. That winter kitchen with its flickering fire, the smell of smoke and coffee, the soft sizzle of soup on the stove became a symbol. A heart-opening love beginning to bloom and trust being given fully for the first time. Jonathan stepped back slightly, eyes on Georgia, breathing steady, whispering, "I'll be here with you, with the children, I promise." Georgia nodded, eyes glistening but shining with light. The boys watched their own hope reflected in their eyes. Zachary grinning, Zeke pressing his lips together, but eyes bright. Under the winter firelight, this family began to live a new rhythm, peaceful, warm, and full of hope. Part 9. A promise. Beneath the cottonwood. The wind swept across the prairie, carrying the scent of dry grass, red dust, and damp earth. The cottonwood leaves quivered sunlight, filtering through the branches, casting dappled patches of light across the ground. The old tree stood tall, a witness to sorrow and loss. But today, it would witness hope newly born. Jonathan held George's hand tightly, fingers squeezing gently, as if to convey all the certainty and commitment in his heart. The two boys stood beside them, Zachary with a bright, beaming smile, Zeke stern, yet eyes glimmering with joy. The small family gathered beneath the cottonwood, a tree that had weathered countless storms, now sacred ground for a lifelong promise. The rustle of leaves in the wind mingled with distant bird song, and the soft creak of the old wooden fence forming a gentle rhythm, slow as the breathing of the entire prairie. Jonathan bent slightly, looking into George's eyes, the soft morning light illuminating her face, highlighting specks of red dust and tear-brightened eyes. "Georgia, I promise," Jonathan whispered, voice warm and steady, "to stand where my brother could not. To build with you and the children a home, a true family." Georgia exhaled softly, tears streaming down her cheeks, eyes hesitant but gentler now. She nodded, voice trembling, "And I will stand with you. Not out of obligation, but out of love." The wind lifted a stray veil, twisting it over the grass, sunlight catching its flight. Their breathing fell into rhythm with the wind, as if the earth itself witnessed the moment. Zachary cheered, running around the tree, laughter spilling into the crisp morning arms, raised as if to embrace the world. Zeke stood beside him, stiff, but eyes shining, seeing for the first time that this family truly belonged to him. Jonathan leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to George's forehead, whispering, "I've been waiting for this moment. since I found that letter." Georgia shivered, but her smile shone clearly now, joining the laughter of the two boys. The morning sun warmed them all, gentle and bright. A distant church bell told its rhythm, slow blending into the homestead's quiet morning. Jonathan reached for Georgia, pulling her close eyes shining with faith and love. He lowered his head, closing his eyes, and whispered his vow, "I will not leave, not ever." The family stood together for a moment, feeling each other's breath, each heartbeat. Every small gesture became an unspoken promise, strengthened by the wind carrying the scent of grass earth and the warmth of the homestead's hearth, reminding them that love and kindness were the only shelter in the harsh West. Jonathan looked to the two boys, voice low but firm. "Zeke, you gave your first trust, and I will not let you down." Zeke nodded, lips twitching into a small smile. Zachary ran forward, wrapping his arms around both Jonathan and Georgia at once, laughter ringing across the field. The cottonwood leaves swayed in the wind, sunlight filtering through the branches, casting warm golden light across their faces. Jonathan squeezed Georgia's hand once more, eyes sparkling with happiness, knowing that from this moment on, no loneliness or loss could ever separate them. He looked at the boys, smiling softly, tears glinting on his cheeks. He whispered, "I will stand here, always." Georgia replied, voice trembling but steady, "And I will too." The wind swept across the fields, carrying the scent of earth-dry grass and a hint of wood smoke, engraving this moment into the endless West. The soft sounds, birds swaying grass, rustling leaves, all blended with the family's breathing, forming a gentle and eternal melody. Jonathan leaned down, taking George's hand, and together they looked at the two boys. Zachary leapt up, hugging Jonathan tightly, while Zeke stood tall, but eyes bright with trust. Sunlight filtered through the cottonwood branches, casting sparkling highlights on their hair. The scene was at once warm and sacred. Jonathan drew a deep breath, taking in the scents of earthgrass dust and the breath of the people he had just made his family. He whispered to himself, "I've found where I belong, and the people I want to protect." And beneath that ancient cottonwood in the wind, the sunlight, and the ringing laughter, a promise was carved into the West. Jonathan would stand where his brother could not, and from this day forward, this home would be a shelter of love and kindness against any storm the frontier could bring. Part 10. The Cry of New Life. Dawn broke over the Wyoming prairie, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the cottonwoods, painting the roof of the old wooden cabin with soft gold. Dew still clung to the grass, sparkling like thousands of tiny crystals, reflecting the gentle morning light into the cabin windows. The air was crisp, but a different warmth radiated from within, the warmth of new life, of a family finding completeness after so much loss. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled its red glow, flickering across the walls, highlighting specks of dust and the soft sheen in George's hair. She sat in a wooden chair, exhausted yet radiant eyes bright with deep happiness. In her arms slept their newborn daughter, her tiny skin soft as spring grass, breath steady and delicate, the rhythm of a brand new life. Jonathan knelt beside her, carefully lifting the baby into his arms. The child nestled against his chest, breathing gently, and Jonathan felt every tiny heartbeat a mirror to the family he had just found. The dawn's light fell across his face, revealing the lines of many sleepless nights, the redness of fatigue, but eyes still alight with warmth and love. Zachary and Zeke stood nearby, eyes wide, mouths agape. Never before had they witnessed such pure happiness. Zachary jumped excitedly, hands trembling, reaching toward the baby, while Zeke stood more reserved, yet his eyes glimmered with trust. Georgia, weary but smiling, placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. Her voice trembled with emotion. "She's perfect." Jonathan closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, exhaling, slowly savoring the moment. "She's ours," he whispered. His hands gently stroked the baby's soft hair, every motion infused with protection, love, and the promise he had held since discovering Cal's letter. The crackle of the fire, the baby's quiet breathing, and the rustle of the prairie grasses outside created a gentle morning melody. Every sound blended with Jonathan's heartbeat, with Georgia's, and with Zachary's and Zeke's, forming the rhythm of a new family, peaceful, warm, complete. Jonathan rose, carrying the baby onto the porch. The morning sunlight illuminated her tiny face, highlighting her sleepy eyes. The boys ran along the porch, laughing and skipping, eyes shining with joy. Zeke occasionally bent to kiss the baby's hand, while Zachary hugged her tightly, pride sparkling in his gaze. Georgia stood nearby, clutching Jonathan's arm, her face radiant, filled with trust. We really have this family," she whispered, tears glistening in the morning light. Jonathan looked across the field, feeling the winter chill through his coat, but his heart warmed. He gently drew Georgia close arms around her, still holding the baby, whispering softly, "I've found where I belong, and the people I want to protect." Zeke placed his hand on Jonathan's shoulder, voice quiet but full of feeling. "Pa, we love you." Zachary smiled, holding the baby. Jonathan looked at his sons, eyes misted, embracing fully the trust, acceptance, and love he had long sought. The wind swept across the porch, carrying the scents of damp earth, dry grass, and the faint smoke from the fireplace. Sunlight lit their hair, faces, and hands, warming their hearts. The old homestead seemed alive, filled with warmth, joy, and love. Jonathan gently placed the baby back in Georgia's arms, leaning down to kiss her forehead. She responded, hand on his shoulder, and together they looked out across the sprawling fields where children's laughter, the wind, and the fire's crackle composed a soft, harmonious song. The final moment, Jonathan whispered to Georgia, voice warm and steady, "I'll stand here, always." Georgia nodded, eyes glistening but radiant. The two boys stood nearby, Zachary laughing with delight, Zeke standing tall, eyes shining with trust. Under the Wyoming sunrise, with the family gathered, the warm glow from the cabin, the soft cry of a newborn, and the prairie wind sweeping across the fields, the story reached its peaceful conclusion. Jonathan did not replace Cal. He chose a new path, building a true home from love and kindness, a family that had found healing and complete happiness. The sunset later draped the Wyoming prairie in golden red sunlight, filtering through the cottonwoods, casting soft streaks across Jonathan and Georgia's faces. On the cabin porch, the warm glow of the oil lamp danced across cracks and wood grain, forming a vivid yet quiet picture, as if the entire prairie had paused to witness the moment of full happiness. Jonathan draped an arm around Georgia, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, the other holding their newborn daughter, who smiled softly, eyes bright and clear, sensing the peace that now enveloped this new family. His face softened in a gentle, tired but warm smile. No longer the lone man on the dusty trail. He was the pillar of a home built from love, trust, and patience. Zeke and Zachary ran around the porch laughing and playing, tossing the last bits of dried leaves. Sunset filtered through the trees, lighting their eyes with joy and innocence, as this was the first time they had felt their family truly whole and safe. Georgia glanced down, hand on Jonathan's chest, gentle smile forming eyes wet but brimming with happiness. She inhaled deeply, the lingering smell of burning wood and coffee bringing back memories of all her lonely, fearful, and sorrowful days. Now, she fully felt the peace she had longed for, not from a promise on paper, but from a man who was truly present, creating a home with her and the children. Jonathan looked down at the boys, voice quiet, almost a whisper to himself. I've found where I belong, where my sons and daughter can laugh, run, and be safe. Zeke leapt forward, grabbing Jonathan's hand, eyes shining with trust. Pa, we love you. Zachary hugged the newborn, beaming. Jonathan bent down, eyes crinkled in a smile, gently stroking Zachary's hair, then lifted the baby in his arms. The evening wind stirred, carrying the warmth of the cabin, the scent of dry grass and earth. Birds returned to their nests, leaves rustled, mingling with children's laughter, and the crackling fire composing a gentle, steady melody, the new heartbeat of this family. Georgia placed her hand on Jonathan's shoulder, eyes glistening but radiant. We truly have a home. Jonathan smiled softly, eyes misted yet full of warmth, leaning to kiss her forehead. And I will keep it, never leaving. The baby's soft cry echoed through the cabin, pure and clear, a blessing for the family. Zeke and Zachary stood proudly, eyes bright with joy, knowing they would never be alone again. Jonathan inhaled deeply, closing his eyes, feeling the family's collective breath. The boys, Georgia's, the newborns, all beating together, warm and complete. From the moment Cal's letter reached his hands to now, the journey of healing was complete. Not to replace Cal, but to choose a new path to build a true home. The wind swept across the porch, shaking the boards lightly, carrying the scent of earth grass and fire smoke. Sunset faded, yet the space glowed in the hearts of Jonathan and Georgia. The two boys played ahead, laughing. The newborn slept peacefully in her father's arms. Jonathan felt perfect contentment, peace after tears, complete joy after loss. He whispered to Georgia, voice low and warm, I've come, and I will never leave. This is where I belong. Georgia nodded, eyes misted, but smiling clearly. And so do I. The family stood quietly breathing together, feeling each heartbeat align. The wind, the birds, the children, the fire all composed a perfect, gentle melody. That old homestead beneath the vast Wyoming sky became witness to a love that had endured loneliness, loss, and storms, a true home where love and kindness stood as the only shelter.